you. My name is Liang, and I teach international development policy and trade policy at Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey.
And my name is Jessica Teets. I'm a professor in the political science department at Middlebury College, and I mostly teach about Chinese politics and authoritarian regimes.
This is a pretty important time to be studying those things. But we're not here to talk about those in particular. That's a much bigger discussion. But my first question is, what a great collaboration between Middlebury College, the undergraduate college in Vermont, and the graduate school, the institute out there in Monterey. How did you two connect, plan, organize, and successfully execute this class? Jessica, you're first because you're the last one who talked to me.
So we've actually done this a couple of times before, but mostly we've gone to China since both of our research and teaching experiences in China. In the past, we've tried to take students with us to do field research in China, but then China closed down. So for 3 years with its COVID policy, it was essentially closed. And so Professor Liang and I tried to think about, well, how could we still do an immersive fieldwork-based class where students could study China if we couldn't go to China. And so then we thought about looking at Chinese investment in Southeast Asia. And so we picked two different countries that we thought would be good case studies to look at this. And so we tried to study what China's doing in other countries as a way to study China from the outside.
Professor Liang, this project that Professor Teets mentioned has places all over the world. You could have gone to Africa, you could have gone to places in Europe. Like, how did you pick Southeast Asia? Why was that important to you, Professor Liang?
Of course, as Professor Teets just mentioned, that we are interested in the global influence of China and Southeast Asia, as a region, like China's neighboring countries. China has really focused its foreign policy, security, economic policies towards this region, especially through the Belt and Road Initiative. So China has become the largest trading partner and also the investor and the foreign aid provider to the region. But also China has a number of like the territorial disputes, South China Sea disputes with the countries in the region. So this is a really interesting region to study from the perspective that economically, most of the countries in the region, they are very much dependent on Chinese market and China's investment. But in terms of security, they want to side with the United States. We're hoping that the U.S. will continue to provide that security umbrella, to their security guarantee. Yeah.
Professor Liang, just to follow up with you a little bit. So you chose a place of a lot of influence, very important for the region, the whole hemisphere. And you bring some students over there. What are you hoping students get out of the experience, this very immersive experiential learning experience?
A couple of things we had in mind when we designed this course. First, we chose this particular project that is a Mekong River, and Mekong River is like a transboundary river flowing through starts from China and going through 5 other Southeast Asian countries. So it's like 6 countries as a whole. So we've seen a lot of different interdisciplinary issues that have been, the students can focus on environmental protection, international relations, U.S.-China competition in terms of the development financing projects, because China has invested so much in the region in terms of the hydropower projects. So we've seen, the region, and in particular, the 2 countries we have chosen as a laboratory for the students to study a number of the issues, depends on, their research interest.
Professor Teets, as mentioned, the river passes through so many countries, and just rivers in general can be so politically fraught. You do something on your land, this is ours, but the river travels hundreds of miles beyond that. Talk about how you were studying sort of the damming of the river, the control of the river, land use of the river for this particular course.
Well, we picked this topic because there's been a lot of damming in this particular river in China. So, Wei, I forget how many dams. It's hundreds of dams, though, but I forget the exact number. But
Yeah.
so there's already been a lot of damming upstream in China. Um, but when we look at energy policies for these countries in Southeast Asia, all of them are talking about, hitting net zero rates fairly shortly by 2040. And they're looking to clean energy, and they're counting on hydropower as a big source of clean energy. And so what we wanted to try to understand was, China is an investor in these projects, but also they are damming the river upstream, which then reduces the flow of water downstream. And so we wanted to try to understand the complicated politics around this source of clean energy. And as our students did interviews with like the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, one thing that we discovered is that for the whole region, that they want to heavily invest in hydropower as a source of clean energy. And what was interesting with our research is that, first of all, we found a lot of evidence to suggest that for most countries, that's not really much of an option, that a lot of the dam building seems like it's going to be concentrated in Cambodia and Lao PDR, and not these other countries. But then also we found lots of evidence from researchers that suggested it's not a particularly clean source of energy. And in fact, one of our interviewees talked about how putting solar farms on top of the existing hydropower projects was actually the best way to generate the needed energy. And that's the importance of doing this kind of field work, is that you can uncover those sorts of things that we weren't finding in the reading.
Such a complex, nuanced, multifaceted, international issue to talk about. I'm going to take a little step back. Professor Teets, I'll stick with you because you're on my screen right now, and talk a little bit about getting the travel over there, support while you were there. And it maybe some of this came from Middlebury's very serious and consistent investment in the idea of conflict transformation and what that might look like. Can you describe for you and for this project what conflict transformation means and how that project and program here at Middlebury supported this course?
Yes. So I'll answer the second part of your question first because it's easier. But so we applied for a grant through Conflict Transformation that was able to cover 100% of the costs for the undergraduate students and everything but the airfare for the graduate students. And so it was a really generous grant, which meant that we could find students who were interested in this type of experience without worrying about whether they'd be able to afford the flight or the hotel or those sorts of things. So it was very generous. And the focus that we took on conflict wasn't so much that we thought that our students, spending 3 weeks in these nations, that they'd be able to solve conflict. It was more this idea that we were learning about the vectors of conflict over both water, but also just energy policy. Every nation in the world is really struggling with this dilemma of we need more electricity in order to develop and have a certain lifestyle, but we don't want dirty sources of energy. We want cleaner sources of energy. So how do you get that? And so our students were able to look at hydropower as an example of clean energy and recognize that, even though we think about these rivers are flowing and they're generating this energy, that actually it's very complicated and that there's lots of politics between upstream nations and downstream nations. We had one example where we were visiting environmental activists at the Mekong School in Thailand, where they sailed fishing vessels out into the river and tried to block off a section that a Chinese company was trying to bomb these rapids so that they could get rid of all of the rocks in the middle of the river and have a more even flow of water for a hydro project. And what we saw with that, you would think that sounds like a classic environmental conflict, right? But actually the security forces in Thailand got involved in this too, because it turns out that the border between Thailand and Myanmar and Thailand and Lao PDR is the river itself. So if you bomb the rapids and change the course of the river, you're effectively shifting national borders. And so the environmentalists ended up winning the day because the security services said, wait a second, you can't change our borders. So it's really interesting, you know, I think in a lot of these cases, you think you're going to investigate one really obvious source of conflict, and you end up finding these really complex interdependencies.
Professor Liang, at the Institute, students and faculty members there are looking at this interplay of environmentalism, activism, politics all the time. What surprised you about this particular project and spending these weeks over there?
Yeah, I think one thing we actually we were quite lucky was that we were able to get the students from different programs at MIS, you know, from the environmental studies and from trade and from development, from the public administration, students with a different background to join this trip, so that not only they have learned from each other, but also they have shared so much information about, you know, the knowledge that they have gained from the classroom to each other. For example, the IEP students could always explain, you know, the specifics of the hydropower projects and, you know, the environmental implication. And then the development students will always talk about the need for the developing countries to have access to energy in order to boost their, you know, much needed economic growth. And so we've seen, you know, the complexity of the issues, even by the sharing of the students based on, you know, what they have learned. And the other thing I think the students have appreciated the most is that they had the opportunities to meet and interact with the stakeholders, be the government officials, the NGO, you know, the leaders, and, you know, they've shared from their own perspective, you know, why certain policies have been implemented, or, you know, what are the constraints domestically and also internationally. For example, we've been talking of before our departure, we read a lot about US-China competition in the region. We talk about the conflict between the upstream country building the dam and the downstream country complaining about environmental negative environmental impact like the drought or, you know, the flood. But once they were there, they were able to actually find out a lot of the nuances. For example, you know, yes, a lot of NGOs in Thailand, they've been, you know, very loudly talking about and trying to really change the damming in the upstream countries. But the reality is that many of those dams in Laos were funded or invested by the Thai company from the elite family. So they, in order to secure the profit, they even signed a very long 25 years contract to supply the electricity, knowing that hydropower projects are controversial and might be, you know, terminated by the government.
I'm going to not follow the path that my brain is going on to look at what that implications of perhaps corruption or investment, not talking about that right now, but what I am going to ask you, Professor Liang, and then you as well, Professor Teets, is this a chance for students, no matter where they are, either at the graduate level or the undergraduate level, to see what they could be doing after their time in the classroom, what jobs they could get as policymakers, as people are doing these things in their careers? Professor Liang, what does it show a student to be able to meet and engage with these people and see perhaps their future?
Definitely, because during the trip, our students were able to meet with the various groups. So students had a really good opportunity to do the networking. And for example, you know, after we finished the trip, two MIS students chose to stay in the region to continue their internship. And they have also reached out to the NGOs that they had the meeting with and really wanted to find the you know, opportunity to continue to do the work that they were introduced at the meeting about you know, preserving the environment you know, along the Mekong River. So they really want to continue, not just to make it a JTEM course and after they turn in their paper and you know, it's over. They actually for some students, they really want to make the regional focus, you know, really part of their you know, career aspiration once they graduate. Yeah.
Professor Teets, did you see a similar light come on in some of the undergraduate students that you were mentoring during this trip?
I did. I think that for a lot of undergraduates, they haven't been on the job market yet. And so they don't necessarily know what job titles are, what sorts of jobs are out there. There are some that are visible, like lawyer, doctor, and you know what those are. But in this research, we met companies that were doing nature-based solutions. So, they're business companies, consulting companies, but they're advocating for using nature-based solutions. So rather than build a dam if you have a problem with flooding, what are the ways that you can use wetlands, right? And so I think that I saw sort of a light bulb go on that there are all of these different types of work that you can do. So if you want to do work with the environment, there are lots of different ways of doing that. We also saw that there were a lot of projects through different international financial institutions. So like the Asia Development Bank, for example, that they've been funding a lot of projects, as have companies like Nestle, that they've been funding projects that are trying to create ecosystem service models. So you pay people upstream not to pollute. So not to pollute the water, not to dam the water. Some that we looked at are trying to get people to either not cut down their trees or to plant trees if they've already cut them down as a way to preserve the wetlands and protect the river. And so I think for them, it was this moment of seeing these really like nuanced jobs that are out there, so that they were able to see, the full environment of where they could work.
Just one more question for you both. Thank you again for taking some time today. Professor Teets, I'll start with you because we just spoke last. There's this sort of tradition that the winter term class, the J term class, I'm going to take something that's sort of lighthearted or fun. I'm going to study the history of graphic novels. This was not that. Why was it important for both of you to have something of real substance and challenge for students to embrace during this time of the year when it might not always be what they want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just that both Professor Liang and I are just like hard classes. We want to be challenged. We want the students to be challenged. We all want to have that intellectual curiosity and try to figure something out together. But also, with the environment, it was really important to us that if we were going to fly close to 20 people, around the world, that you had to really be doing something, that it wasn't just sort of edutourism where students go to a place and they're just tourists. We really wanted it to be where you would learn something that you had no other way of realizing. So we had done a lot of readings before we went about this topic. And so what we really wanted students to do was dig beneath the surface and really try to figure out, what are some things that people aren't talking about, or what are some really complex issues that maybe other people don't understand well, and we can shed some light on that. And so it was really important to us from like a time perspective or resources perspective with the environment that this class really try to do something important and provide some kind of value.
Professor Liang, how about you? Can you talk a little about the importance for you of not having this be a performative course, but something that really can contribute to not just an education, but the future of one of the young people that we work with?
Sure. Because both Professor Teets and I, we have done a lot of field research for our own, projects in the region or on the ground. So we kind of appreciate really the opportunity that the students have through this kind of immersive courses to be able to do solid field work. So we wanted to really make sure that students learn, and especially when we are there, so that we can guide the students step by step to look at how the information can be collected through those kind of interview meetings, and how to process the information, and how to analyze the information and turn that into a original research paper. So the classroom teaching and learning, of course, they are important, but this kind of immersive trips will provide that unique opportunity to complement and really to showcase to the students how the researchers are doing their field work, and by doing it. So it's really, to me, a learning by doing kind of opportunity. So of course, we want to make sure the students don't miss this great opportunity to learn.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the live stream now, and then we'll say goodbye on our platform.